Okay, hello everybody. It's essay review time for Wednesday's in-class exam. The question will be, President Franklin D. Roosevelt is commonly thought of as a liberal, and Herbert Hoover is a conservative. To what extent are these characterizations valid? I should point out that I think I've lost hearing in both my left and right ears, so if I'm yelling or don't sound clear, I apologize. Okay, so the outline that you should be utilizing. Your introduction, make sure you make a thesis statement that clearly says you believe that these titles are valid or somewhat valid or not valid. You don't have to refer to the quote, but in your intro, make reference to FDR and Hoover being liberal, conservative, moderately so. Some people might want to start with the background of the 1920s, and that's all on the video that I did previously. If you want to do that, that's a great approach to take. You can do a slow lead, or your thesis develops maybe in the second paragraph. That's okay. So whatever you feel comfortable with is fine. After you've done that, I think some background information on the causes of the Great Depression would be helpful. I won't be going over that in this outline. Again, there's a video with that information. Then I always like to do things chronologically, so Hoover first and then FDR. Sometimes kids go back and forth comparing and contrasting. I don't believe you have to do that. Hoover's response, then FDR's response, and then I'll go over a conclusion for you. So for Hoover's response, here is the general feeling. He was against direct federal intervention, doesn't believe the government should be offering people money, okay? He was in favor of rugged individualism. We need to work hard to overcome this terrible time in history. He believed in voluntary steps to maintain employment, meaning he wanted businesses, if they could, to maintain employment. Could they keep their wages the same? Everybody be patient. Eventually, this is going to pass. You could even look at it's 28, of course, before the crash, but here, work and vote for the Republican Party and prosperity. They went through an entire decade almost of this prosperity, and people felt very strongly that Hoover was the right man for the job. Just a few things you might recall. Herbert Hoover was a self-made millionaire in engineering. He was the head of the Food Administration during World War I. He was Secretary of Commerce during the 1920s, and the Secretary of the Treasury, Andrew Mellon, who was Treasury Secretary for Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover. He said that economic downturns are a normal part of capitalism. He believed that there were going to be highs and lows, and these bad times economically are going to weed out any unproductive businesses. This was the mindset. Hoover even quoted Grover Cleveland. Grover Cleveland, you might recall, was the president during the Pullman strike, during the Gilded Age. And Cleveland said the government should not support the people. Federal aid weakens the sturdiness of our national character. So these type of ideas are very conservative in nature. I hope you all understand that everything I have here is a more conservative economic philosophy. Not the federal government getting involved, but let the free market dictate these actions. Okay. One of the criticisms that Hoover did face is that he said on a few occasions, the tide has turned, and it made him appear that he was a little bit out of touch with the economic conditions of the time. So now let's make sure we all make this transition. While this general philosophy is conservative, to say that Hoover did not take any actions is just not accurate. So make sure that you transition by stating that Hoover's general philosophy was conservative. However, he did take some measures, whether they were successful or not is for the people to decide, but he did take some measures to try to resolve this issue. And let's see if I can get to that. Okay, so first, in no particular order, he did sign the Hawley-Smoot tariff, which was the highest, and that didn't work, which was the highest rate in history. And there they are. There's Hawley and there's Smoot. So you get a little bit of play for the little publicity for the two men who signed the tariff that probably contributed to 10 more years of economic decline throughout the world. Because this tariff led to decreased trade throughout Europe and America. They raised their tariffs, and it became a disaster. All right, next, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, RFC. This is going to be hundreds of millions of dollars in loans to railroads, to banks, and to insurance companies. And the RFC, I made the comparison to the bailout under President Bush, but the RFC's primary objective is going to try to restore the big infrastructure of our economy. Again, no direct money to people. Next, the Federal Home Loan Bank System. This is something I learned this year. He did offer some aid to homeowners who were threatened with foreclosures. This is something I did not go over in class, and I don't want to confuse people, so if you don't understand it, just skip it. But after a lot of criticism throughout his term, $2 billion was given for public works. Now, not directly. He's basically giving this to the states and then allowing the states to decide what they would like to build with this money. But that's only after tremendous criticism, probably on the verge of the next election. And then we have our bonus march, in which World War I veterans were hoping to receive their payments early that were due in 1945. Instead, however, the Congress rejected this plan. Hoover even offered, they marched to Washington, D.C., and Hoover even offered to pay for their trips to come home. But unfortunately, they refused to do so. Well, they're allowed to stay, of course, but they protested throughout the Capitol, and then we called in the military under Douglas MacArthur against our own veterans and used tear gas. I believe 2 people died, including, as well as an infant. This really would be the final nail for Hoover's coffin. Don't write that in an essay, of course. People blamed Hoover for the Depression. These are Hoovervilles right here. And that's not what I wanted to do. The people just started to blame Hoover for the Depression, Hoovervilles, Hoover flags, Hoover blankets. And in 1932, he is up against a very wealthy individual from New York who pledged a New Deal for the country. And this will be FDR. FDR's victory, as you can see, possibly here, it's a little small, consisted of most of the states other than Pennsylvania, Delaware, Connecticut, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. So FDR's landslide victory in 1932 ushers in a new era for the country. Now remember, this is going to be a transition to far more government involvement, far more government regulation of the economy, clearly a liberal agenda. FDR's inaugural address is when he says the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. He speaks to the people with fireside chats to encourage them. Relief, recovery, and reform were his 3 R's: relief for the people, recovery for the banks, and reform for the system. He surrounded himself with the Brain Trust, economic advisors. One name in particular that you might recall is John, not working for me today. And as I said, I can't hear, and now one of my dogs is snoring terribly. John Maynard, by the way, it's 1:39 a.m. for me. John Maynard Keynes is going to be a leading advisor of FDR's, and his whole idea of deficit spending, that you should spend money even if it's going to increase the national debt, because that is what will stimulate economic growth over the long haul. So Keynesian economics is about as liberal as you're going to find in this time period. For those of you interested, Keynes actually did have some nice things to say about Hoover after World War I. Said he was the only man to emerge from Versailles with any enhanced reputation. And that was an interesting, since obviously they're going to disagree with each other later on. Okay, so we did the fireside chats, all that stuff. So now let's go to, when he ran for president, one of the key differences is that FDR supported the repeal of prohibition, probably for financial reasons, but that was a key factor, I believe, in the election. And Hoover was not in favor of doing that. And prohibition is the movement to ban alcohol. Okay, so now initially, FDR is going to call for a bank holiday. He closes down every bank in the nation and will reopen them as he sees fit to help restore people's faith in the economic system. Remember, people lost money in the banks right after the stock market crash, and there were people putting money in their mattresses, in their backyards. So this is a way for him to make people feel more confident about the banks, which is critical to our capitalist system. I can point out that in 1936, 4 years later, there was not one bank that failed in America. So that would point to the argument that FDR's plan worked. Some of you are smiling at that very happily, and others are considering my information to be liberal propaganda. Okay, but we have to go with the Glass-Steagall Act here. The Glass-Steagall Act, I think some of you are probably still confused, and rightfully so I gave you a lengthier definition. It barred commercial banks from becoming involved in buying and selling stocks. Again, it regulated the banks. Again, it separated banks from investment firms. It's a regulatory act that was going to try to prevent the problems that led up to the stock market crash. In addition to this, the FDIC is going to insure people's bank accounts. And this combination led to a much stronger banking system for at least 70 years. I never told you this in class, but he did take us off the gold standard. Don't worry about that right now. And then remember, there are people that would like to restore Glass-Steagall today, and there they are. There's Glass, and there's Steagall. But I'll teach you something about them maybe later on. Now, remember the plan overall is called the New Deal, and FDR didn't have this well-orchestrated plan from the beginning. It kind of evolved over the time. But I will point out that in his first 100 days, he passed a staggering array of programs. That was just really unprecedented. So now presidents are often reviewed after 100 days since this time. Now, no particular order, but the National Industrial Recovery Act kind of encompasses several of these early programs. The creation of the National Recovery Administration, that is when business leaders were coordinating their efforts together with the government to try to establish certain codes in the industry for how much they would produce, what the prices would be, what working conditions should be. Some of you might think that sounds a little communistic or socialistic, and I understand that. Next, Civilian Conservation Corps. This was for young men to work in the environment, and they would be paid $30 every month, of which 25 would be sent back to their families. But they worked in raking leaves, building parks, cutting down trees. There was tremendous camaraderie from these young men who experienced a life-changing time in the CCC. The PWA and the CWA, Public Works Administration, Civil Works Administration, put millions of people to work building roads and hospitals, schools, public facilities, highways, tunnels, courthouses, airports. And these programs definitely cost a lot of money, but they did create jobs, although some would say that those jobs were temporary. The TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority. There were people in the 7-state region of the South that were extremely poor. So FDR decided we're going to build a dam to hold back the water in this area. But we're going to use that dam to create hydroelectric power. and this would then provide cheap electricity for the region. However, critics of this deemed it to be creeping socialism because it is the government that is competing with the private electricity companies. Next is the Agricultural Adjustment Administration. This act paid farmers to not grow crops, to limit production, and they slaughtered pigs. That's something I probably should have come up with a picture for. But actually, let's see if I can get one. All right, that didn't work. I also didn't like the pictures that I saw, a little bit too graphic. But anyway, they paid farmers because overproduction was causing the prices to decline, so they figured that if they reduce production and slaughter the pigs and not use it for food, that prices would go up. It's an economic theory that some would agree with and others would think is outrageous. The Works Progress Administration is going to build off of the PWA and CWA, so more building projects, but also, I didn't really emphasize this in class at all, a lot of artistic work was paid for. So there's a lot of artwork from this era due to the WPA. The Wagner Act recognized labor unions. It's often referred to as the Magna Carta of labor. And then Social Security. I know I went into great depth on this in class. You tax people now, that money will then go into a fund for elderly people to give them monthly payments for the remainder of their lives. I feel like I'm going quickly, but I do want to get to the end. Okay, now we have some critics of the New Deal. And first and foremost would be this man right here. This is Huey Long. And Huey Long was nicknamed the Kingfish. Huey Long's program, Huey Long was a governor of Louisiana and then a senator from Louisiana. And Huey Long believed that every family should have $5,000. Every family should have a job. Every family should have a car and a house. And while governor and senator of Louisiana, he did great things to move that state forward by getting them roads and schools and hospitals. He may have used some unethical means to do so, but he decided that FDR was not doing enough. So he was going to challenge him in 1936. But and his program, which I just described, is called Share Our Wealth. Well, Huey Long did not get a chance to run for election against FDR because he was assassinated in 1936. Okay, this guy right here is Father Charles Coughlin, who was very disappointed with the progress of the New Deal as well, and then on radio went onto a rant blaming bankers for causing the Depression, but his rant became anti-Semitic, and he lost all credibility. And then this guy down here is Dr. Francis Townsend, who is probably responsible for the Social Security Act being passed, because he said every elderly person should be given $200 a month, of which they must spend that money to stimulate the economy. And then in 1936, FDR is going to run for re-election against this man, Alf Landon. Remember, Alf Landon was a Kansas governor who attacked Social Security, but remember, the business community did not support FDR. The business community was very disappointed with his efforts and his attack on laissez-faire. And Alf Landon tried to be the leader for them, but got pummeled in the election. The only states that Alf Landon won were Maine and Vermont. Okay, now for your conclusion, everybody. I hope this is helpful. Again, I'm struggling that I can't hear. For your conclusion, you can mention something about the Supreme Court if you'd like. The Supreme Court started to declare some of the New Deal acts to be unconstitutional, and FDR tried to pack the Supreme Court, said he should be able to appoint a new justice for everyone who's over 70 years of age. So he wanted the Supreme Court to go from 9 to 15 members, but that plan was rejected by Congress. Congress said no to this plan. And if you wanted to say that FDR, that it was not really the New Deal that ended the Great Depression, but instead it was the World War II and our involvement, you could make that argument. If you want to criticize it by saying that the national debt increased, you can do that as well. If you want to support the New Deal and say how it restored people's faith in the country and how it gave them at least jobs temporarily while the economy was recovering, you can say that. On a personal note, I would love for you to end by saying that in 1999, Bill Clinton repealed Glass-Steagall. And he did so by signing the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act. I know I'm getting carried away, but I just love this stuff. And you could point out that North Dakota Senator, I hope you've watched this video, Byron Dorgan predicted in 1999 that we would seriously regret this decision to repeal Glass-Steagall. So maybe the motivation or the incentive I'll give you is, if you do this in the conclusion, plus 2 points on your overall essay grade. Why not? Give Byron Dorgan some credit. And he accurately predicted it. So I hope this is a helpful review for the essay. If you have any further questions, please send them my way. It went a lot longer than I thought. And I guess if you're watching it on Columbus Day, happy Columbus Day. Have a good day.